Garrett stood up in the back of the courtroom, not because he had something to say, but because something in his body wouldn't let him sit anymore. His hands shook, not from fear, but from that sick heat that rises when you know something is wrong and no one else can see it. There was a laugh, short, hollow, ugly. It came from behind the bench, from the man in the robe who should have been neutral, fair, human. But Judge Whitaker's laugh was none of those things. It wasn't just cruel, it was surgical, designed to humiliate. Across the room, a 17-year-old black kid named Elijah Harper stood motionless, his jaw clenched, but not because he was breaking. No, it was something else. That stillness was too sharp, like the calm before the glass explodes inward. You've never heard a courtroom this quiet. Not on TV, not in real life. It wasn't silence, it was suspension, as if time itself waited to see what Elijah would do next. But no one noticed his lips move. Not really. No one but me. He whispered something, just once. Something low, impossible to catch, and yet somehow it burned through the air like static on your skin. Judge Whitaker stopped laughing, just froze, like his brain had gone somewhere else. Then he blinked, coughed, and carried on like nothing had happened. But I saw it. So did the bailiff. So did Garrett, now pressed up against the wood-paneled wall as if it could absorb what none of us could explain. It didn't feel like court anymore. It felt like standing in front of something buried too long, something ancient and intimate, dressed up in suits and statutes, pretending to be civil. That night, the footage of the trial was mysteriously corrupted, just in the moment. Elijah spoke. Every other second remained crystal clear, except that one. 3 days later, the judge was gone. No resignation, no notice, just vanished. His chambers locked from the inside, and his last search history a single word. Atticus. No context, no location. Just that. And on the edge of his desk, someone had drawn the scales of justice, but upside down and dripping red ink. The news tried to bury it. The law firm Garrett interned for told him to stop asking questions. But one thing kept surfacing in Garrett's mind, louder, each day. What did Elijah say? Then, last week, Garrett got an envelope, no return address, just his name in tight, perfect lettering. Inside, a single photograph of Elijah, older now, in a crisp navy suit, walking out of a federal courthouse. The caption had no date, but one word was burned in bold. Attorney. Garrett flipped the photo over, and written in the same hand that had addressed the envelope were 5 words that undid his entire understanding of what had happened that day in court. He wasn't born in this year. And that was when the lights in Garrett's apartment flickered, and his phone rang from a number that had been disconnected since 1996. Garrett didn't answer the phone. He let it ring, once, twice, while his breathing grew shallow and cold sweat traced the back of his neck like a hand he couldn't shake off. The number on the screen blinked. 617-555 EUR 43. He knew that number. Not because he recognized it, but because it belonged to someone who'd been dead for nearly 30 years. That was his uncle's number. Jonathan Hartley, the last man, to investigate a federal judge who vanished without explanation. The same man whose body was found in a locked shed 5 counties over. No blood, no wounds, just a look on his face like he'd died of seeing something. The phone went dark before he could decide what to do. It didn't even leave a missed call notification. Garrett didn't sleep that night. Not really. He closed his eyes, but his body never let go. He kept thinking of the photo, Elijah in that suit, the word attorney, like it was both title and warning. And then that line. He wasn't born in this year. It crawled under his skin like an itch that couldn't be scratched without peeling back something more than flesh. What did it even mean? Garrett dug out Elijah's court records, sealed. Now somehow, even though they'd been public only weeks before. And then he remembered something worse. He couldn't remember why he had been in the courtroom that day. He knew he had been there. He remembered the judge laughing, remembered the temperature in the room, the sound of Elijah's voice. But when he tried to remember why he had walked in, what had brought him there in the first place, blank, like trying to grab a thought underwater. Garrett checked his calendar. That week had no entries. His phone photos had nothing between May the 2nd and May 8th, a 6-day blackout, just gone. He couldn't even recall where he had parked his car that day. The next morning, Garrett's apartment was colder than it should have been. He checked the thermostat. Dead. Batteries fine, no signal. He grabbed his coat, stepped outside, and nearly tripped over a man crouching near the door. "Hey," the man said. Too fast, too loud, like someone who had been rehearsing the word all night. He was thin, raw-boned, with hollow cheeks and eyes that didn't blink often enough. "You're Garrett, right?" Garrett froze. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but not with his mouth. His name was Carter, or at least that's what he said. He claimed he'd worked in records at the courthouse before they scrubbed the files. That's how he said it. Scrubbed. Like it was a crime. Scene, not a database. "I was there too," Carter said, voice low now, almost apologetic, when Elijah whispered whatever it was. "But it's not what you think. You didn't hear what you thought you heard. None of us did." "What did he say?" Carter hesitated, as if the answer had been caught in his throat for years. "That's just it," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. He didn't say anything. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "I recorded it. Watch," he fumbled. Out a battered phone, screen spiderwebbed with cracks. He pulled up a video file labeled only with a date. 5/4/255. It showed the courtroom, Judge Whitaker mid-laugh, Elijah staring. Carter zoomed in, his hand trembling. And there it was. Elijah's lips moved. Garrett leaned closer, straining. Nothing. Not even the hiss of white noise. But Garrett remembered the whisper. He had heard it. Carter looked at him. "You heard it, right?" "Yes, but you see what I see." Garrett nodded, stomach churning. "Yeah." And then Carter said something Garrett never expected. "You ever wonder if the whisper wasn't in the room?" Garrett backed up, blinking. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means maybe we didn't hear Elijah, maybe Elijah heard us." The words sat in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Carter looked down, wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "I lost time too, days, weeks. Sometimes I hear that same voice in recordings, in white noise, in old voicemails. It's like it's following us." That was when Garrett's phone buzzed. One new voicemail, no missed call. He played it on speaker, a burst of static then. "He said your name." Carter dropped his phone. They didn't speak after that. Garrett walked away, heart beating wrong. By the time he looked back, Carter was gone. The next few days unraveled slowly, like a thread caught on something jagged. Garrett's clocks began blinking the wrong time. His laptop would turn on by itself, display a Word doc with a single sentence. "You were in the hallway, not the courtroom." It made no sense, until Garrett found the courthouse blueprints in an old archive and realized something awful. There was no public hallway adjacent to that courtroom. Not anymore. It had been sealed off after a fire in 1987. The same year Judge Whitaker's predecessor vanished. The name on that file? Judge Atticus Monroe. That night, Garrett found an audio recorder buried in a box in his closet, one he didn't remember owning. It was old, tape-based. He pressed play, at first just silence. Then breathing, close, wet, like someone standing inches from the mic. Then a voice, clear as rain on glass. "Do you remember what you did?" Garrett dropped it. He felt the floor tilt, like the building wasn't anchored to anything real. That voice, it was his, but younger. A child's version of himself. Not the way kids sound in memory, but accurate, specific. Like it had been taken from a home video he never knew existed. He began seeing things at the edge of reflections, not faces, but moments. Images of things that shouldn't be there. Elijah in the reflection of his coffee table, mouthing something backwards. A baby crawling across the floor in a window's glare. No baby in the room. Sometimes he'd hear typing when no one was around, and his phone would fill with notes he never wrote. Phrases like, That wasn't your name back then. Back then, Garrett didn't sleep for 2 nights. On the 3rd, he caved. He called the number again. The Waifur. One from the disconnected line. This time, someone answered, a woman. You're early, she said, confused. He's not ready yet. Who is? Elijah. Or whatever he used to be. The call cut. Garrett sat on his bed until dawn. He tried to piece things together, but nothing held. His memories began to contradict themselves. He had a scar on his shoulder he couldn't remember getting, but it showed up in pictures going back 10 years. His mother's voice on an old voicemail pronounced his name differently. Garrett instead of Garrett. A minor shift. But once you start noticing, nothing feels stable. He drove out to the old courthouse on a hunch, parked outside, walked to the sealed hallway. The door had no handle, but there was a word scratched into the wood in fine, delicate strokes, like it had been carved with a needle. Remember. And then, as if time obeyed the command, it came back. Elijah hadn't whispered a curse. He hadn't said a word at all. He had looked at Garrett, directly at him, and mouthed the words, "We've done this before." And now the question wasn't whether Garrett had forgotten the past. It was whether the past had let him forget. In the mirror next to the door, his reflection blinked half a second too late, then whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." Garrett wasn't supposed to find the basement. That's what gnawed at him as he stared down the concrete stairs, the light above flickering like a faulty signal trying to warn him off. The courthouse had no record of this lower level. No blueprint, no key, no digital reference. And yet, when he followed the sound, the low mechanical hum that didn't belong anywhere above ground, it led him to the far end of the sealed corridor, the one marked unsafe for entry, behind the courtroom Elijah had stood in. The padlock was rusted, not new. No one had opened this in years, or at least no one official. He should have turned around, but the hum vibrated against his ribs in a way that made curiosity feel less like a choice and more like instinct, like remembering something your bones already knew. With a click that felt too soft, the door gave way and Garrett stepped into a stairwell that smelled like iron, oil, and the past. The descent was long, longer than it should have been, like the stairs circled in on themselves until the walls grew too tight for sound. At the bottom, a door. Unmarked, cold to the touch. And beyond it, a room. Dust-choked, lit by a single oscillating fluorescent bulb that didn't blink so much as tremble. There were shelves, dozens, each one lined with black VHS tapes, tagged only with dates and court docket numbers. A small CRT television sat on a desk in the center, already powered on. A tape was halfway inside the VCR, waiting. Garrett didn't know why, but he pushed it in. The screen fuzzed, then cleared. A courtroom, different but familiar. Mid-90s by the look of it. A child stood at the defendant's table. Not Elijah, someone else. The footage was black and white, no sound. But Garrett watched as the judge leaned forward, clearly speaking, then recoiled. The child said something. It was the same pattern. The judge froze, blinked, then resumed as though nothing had happened. Garrett watched 5 more tapes. Different defendants, different years. All children, all saying something silent. Each time, the judge stopped mid-sentence, jolted like a film skipping a frame, then carried on. It wasn't just Elijah. It had never been just Elijah. This had been happening for decades. Garrett's hands went cold. His breath slowed. Something cracked inside him, a belief he hadn't known he'd been carrying. That this was about one moment, one trial, one mystery he could untangle if he just pulled the right thread. But this was older, patterned, designed. Still, he felt like he had something now, a truth, a record. The tapes were proof, right? Proof that something had been happening beneath the surface, that others had seen it and, for reasons he didn't want to understand, had decided to let it happen. Maybe this was the hidden truth, people whispered about online, the kind that gets buried under memory glitch and conspiracy hashtags. Maybe he could expose it. Finally put an end to the question no one dared to ask. As he left the basement, Garrett didn't notice the camera above the door turned to follow him. He brought the tapes to an old friend, Maya. She had worked in broadcast. Archives before she quit said the edits they were doing to restructure public record made her sick. Garrett trusted her. Mostly. She pulled the first tape into her system, her fingers flying over keys with mechanical fluency. "This is, real?" she asked without looking at him. "I found it below the courthouse. You didn't bring anything else from there, right?" Her voice cracked slightly. Garrett hesitated. "Why?" "Because this room's not secure." "From what?" Maya didn't answer. The footage loaded frame by frame. But as she enhanced the resolution, something broke, literally. Her monitor sparked. Static poured from her speakers. Then, just for a second, the tape reversed itself, and on screen the child in the footage looked directly at Garrett, through the monitor, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Then the screen went black. Maya shoved her chair back. No, this isn't possible." Garrett's chest tightened. "What?" She stared at him. "You were in this footage. That's not..." She pulled up a backup frame and there he was, not in the courtroom, in the gallery, wearing a navy hoodie sitting 2 rows back, head turned just slightly, but it was him, down to the scar on his jaw from a bike crash in 8th grade. He stared at the child defendant like he already knew what was coming. But the timestamp was 1997. Garrett was 7 years old in 1997. He couldn't be there, unless he left Maya's studio in a daze. Outside, the air smelled wrong, burned, metallic. A woman passed him on the sidewalk and flinched like she recognized him from somewhere terrible. A bus drove by and he caught his own reflection in the window. Only it was older. Years older. His hair thinner, his eyes darker, expression hollow. He stopped walking. When he turned around, Maya's building wasn't there. In its place was a condemned lot with a rusted fence and a posted notice. Demolished, 2009. That night, Garrett found a journal buried in a shoebox in his closet, behind tax records and old clothes. It was written in his handwriting, but the entries weren't his. They spoke of someone else, him, but not. The way a dream might talk about you, not to you. One entry read, "If I forget again, remind me. This isn't about Elijah. It never was. The courtroom is a doorway, not between places, between selves. They watch through verdicts. They feed on repetition. Every time I think I've solved it, I wake up somewhere new, wearing my name like it still fits. But I remember now. For a while, at least. The lie isn't what they did. The lie is that it's over." Garrett dropped the book. He didn't sleep. Over the next week, things got stranger. His phone had no contacts, only recordings, some of him speaking while clearly asleep. Others whispered, in voices that mimicked people he once loved, but twisted just enough to make his stomach turn. Static flooded his ears every time he passed through doorways. He began seeing flashes of himself in places he hadn't been. News footage from the 2000s, random photos online, group shots with strangers whose names he couldn't place, but whose faces felt deeply familiar in the worst way. He wasn't unraveling. Mystery. He was the mystery. And then just as he reached the edge, just when he was ready to accept that maybe he'd never understand any of this, that he was a fragment stitched into someone else's loop, it happened. He found the case. Feeling it was slipped under his door, no name, no note, just an envelope with a Department of Justice seal, the kind you only see in thrillers and whistleblower documentaries. Inside, full transcripts, images, and a death certificate. Judge Whitaker didn't vanish. He died. In 1992, the same year Elijah Harper was born. Garrett sat on the floor for hours, holding the paper like it might disintegrate under breath. None of this made sense. If Whitaker died in 92, who had been on the bench weeks ago? Who had laughed? Who had stared Elijah down? And then it clicked. Fiat, whisper. The courtroom, the recordings, the truth. It wasn't a judge at all. It was something wearing his face. And maybe, just maybe, it had worn Garrett's face too, because the final page of the file wasn't a report. It was a photo, a grainy surveillance shot, time-stamped. June 12th, 2023. A courthouse security feed. The gallery. A single man sitting 2 rows back. It was Garrett, and underneath it, written in black marker, "You never left." Garrett's world had already begun to fracture, but it was the arrival of the envelope that truly shattered his perception of reality. Inside, a single photograph depicted him seated in a courtroom gallery, time-stamped June 12, 2023. The caption read, "You never left." This revelation was the tipping point, plunging him into a labyrinth of uncertainty and dread. In the days that followed, Garrett began noticing symbols etched into the fabric of his daily life. A spiral drawn in condensation on his bathroom mirror, a triangle with an eye scribbled on a napkin at his local diner, and a series of numbers, 330, graffitied on a park bench. These symbols seemed to follow him, appearing in places he frequented, as if marking his path. He recalled reading about similar occurrences in the Cicada 3301 puzzles, where cryptic messages and symbols were used to recruit individuals for unknown purposes. Wikipedia. Garrett's dreams became increasingly vivid and unsettling. He found himself in a vast, dimly lit library, its shelves stretching infinitely in all directions. Each book he opened contained transcripts of court proceedings, all eerily similar to Elijah Harper's case. In these dreams, a shadowy figure watched him from afar, its face obscured, yet its gaze palpable. Upon waking, he discovered notes scribbled, his own handwriting, messages he had no recollection of writing. They see through the verdicts, and the courtroom is a doorway. Desperate for answers, Garrett turned to online forums, where he stumbled upon discussions about the Schuylkill notes, cryptic messages found in grocery items across Pennsylvania. These notes contained symbols and phrases similar to those haunting Garrett, suggesting a broader, more insidious network at play. Wikipedia. One night, Garrett received an anonymous email containing a video file titled Found Footage, 2003. The grainy footage depicted a courtroom scene, with a young defendant eerily resembling Elijah Harper. As the judge delivered the verdict, the video distorted, and a distorted voice whispered, "You were right all along." Garrett's reflection appeared on the screen, watching the proceedings from the gallery. The video ended abruptly, leaving Garrett shaken and questioning the boundaries between reality and illusion. Garrett's sense of identity began to erode. He encountered individuals who claimed to know him, referencing conversations and events he couldn't recall. His own memories felt fragmented, as if pieces were missing or altered. He started to suspect that his experiences were part of a larger, orchestrated narrative, one in which he was both participant and observer. In a final act of desperation, Garrett returned to the courthouse, seeking the basement where he had first discovered the tapes. However, the stairwell was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Confused and disoriented, he wandered the halls until he encountered a janitor who handed him a note reading, "The courtroom is a doorway, but not all doors lead out." Before Garrett could respond, the janitor vanished. As Garrett stood alone, in the empty corridor, he realized that the truth he sought might be beyond comprehension, that the forces at play operated on a level imperceptible to human understanding. The symbols, the dreams, the altered memories, all pointed to a reality where identity and perception were malleable, controlled by unseen entities. The only certainty was that he was not alone, and that others were watching, waiting, and perhaps guiding him toward an unknown destiny. https n.wikipedia.org, wiki, cicada, 3301, UTM source, ChatGPT, com, cicada 3301, https n.wikipedia.org, wiki, Schuylkill notes, UTM source, ChatGPT, com, Schuylkill notes. Garrett stood alone in the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. The walls, lined with shelves of dusty files and tapes, seemed to close in on him, each containing fragments of lives entangled in the same enigma he now faced. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and pulled a file labeled Case 3301. Inside, he found transcripts of court proceedings eerily similar to Elijah Harper's case, each with a defendant who uttered a phrase that caused the judge to freeze momentarily before resuming as if nothing had happened. As he delved deeper, Garrett discovered a pattern, a sequence of events repeating over decades, involving different individuals but always culminating in the same inexplicable courtroom behavior. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. This was not an isolated incident, but a recurring phenomenon, a loop that ensnared those who dared to question it. Among the documents, Garrett found a personal letter addressed to him, dated years before he was born. The handwriting was unmistakably his own. The letter spoke of a choice, a decision that would either perpetuate the cycle or break it, but at a cost. It warned of the dangers of seeking the truth, of the thin line between enlightenment and madness, torn between the desire to uncover the reality behind the courtroom anomalies and the fear of losing himself in the process. Garrett faced an existential dilemma. He pondered the nature of identity, the reliability of memory, and the possibility that his very existence was a construct within a larger, incomprehensible design. In a moment of vulnerability, Garrett recorded a confession, speaking, "To an unseen audience, I don't know who I am anymore. Each discovery leads to more questions, and the answers I find only deepen the mystery. If you're watching this, know that the truth is not what it seems. It's a mirror reflecting infinite versions of ourselves, each trapped in their own reality." The courtroom is not just a place of judgment, it's a gateway to understanding, or oblivion. As he finished speaking, the lights flickered, and the room's temperature dropped. A low hum resonated from the walls, growing louder until it became a deafening roar. Garrett clutched his head, overwhelmed by a flood of memories, some his own, others foreign yet intimately familiar. Visions of past courtrooms, different judges and defendants flashed before his eyes, each scene blurring into the next. Suddenly, silence. Garrett opened his eyes to find himself back in the courtroom, where Elijah Harper's trial had taken place. The room was empty, save for a single figure seated in the judge's chair. As Garrett approached, the figure turned, revealing a face identical to his own. "Welcome back," the doppelganger said. "It's time to choose." Garrett realized that the cycle could only be broken by confronting himself, by accepting the multiplicity of his existence and the role he played in perpetuating the loop. He understood that the truth was not a destination but a journey inward, a confrontation with the self. He reached out to his mirror image, and as their hands touched, the courtroom dissolved into darkness. In that void, Garrett found clarity, not answers, but in the acceptance of uncertainty. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.